Good evening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for joining us at the Arts Club tonight. My name is Sibel Vasquez. I'm the head of cultural programming for the Arts Club. And this evening, we are going to discuss what is good design, which, needless to say, is a tough one. But as it turns out, there are a number of institutions and designers, some of whom we know, some of whom we've heard of, that have made it their mission to be able to find ways to answer that question. And we're very lucky this evening to have two of those such people. And so I'm going to introduce them to you very briefly before we start talking about what it is that this video is about, and the work that they've put into that and what it means towards accomplishing good design. Nada Debs, you hardly need an introduction. You are a widely successful designer in our region. Very few of us haven't come across your work, or actually a lot of us, I'm sure, have some of your work in our homes as well. Your work is widely centered around craftsmanship, which is what we're going to discuss in a moment. And I also do want to mention, congratulations, you, I think it was a few days ago, last week, you won a very prestigious award, the Architectural Digest for Best Product Design, so congratulations, Nada. And Farah Nasri, who is here to represent Irthi Contemporary Crafts Council. Farah, you are in charge of the curatorial and design department of Irthi. Welcome, both of you, and thank you for being here. Now, before we begin, I'd like Farah, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit about Irthi, what it does, and yeah.
Thank you, Sibel, and thank you to the Arts Club for having me and having Irthi Contemporary Crafts Council, and really acknowledging that, you know, crafts and the preservation of crafts is something that is important to note and something that is important to talk about. As you saw from the video, we have been working as a council based in Sharjah and in the UAE on the preservation of heritage crafts, not only within the UAE but within the Manasiyah region. And we look into different ways as a curation and design department to really curate content and document the crafts that are happening in the region or that have happened in the past, and to find new ways to recuperate with these crafts and find ways where they find a place within our modern world, whether that means it's in terms of publications or bodies of work or designs. We work together with designers such as Nada, researchers, students, as well as scientists to bring together this world of heritage craft and design. And we're happy to be sharing this with you today, and sharing with you the Zenobia Collection. And thank you, Sibel.
Thank you. No, it's very important to give some context also to what Irthi does, because it is the premise of this collaboration between your institution and obviously you, Nada. So if you don't mind, either one of you can take this question, but where did this all start? Actually, Farah, you can start. You guys, so you collaborate with designers. In order to preserve or to work around craftsmanship and heritage, right, in modern design, so to speak. Where did this collaboration begin? What's the first day into this journey?
So during COVID, we had to find new avenues for our jobs and our artisans' jobs, and we found ourselves really digging into information and looking into content curation rather than the curation of designed objects, just because it was easier at that point to interview artisans, even if it's virtually, document their work through videos, photos, rather than create new productions. And we embarked on that, and we looked into many different crafts, telly, also the craft of perfume, the craft of dyeing, etc. And we actually stumbled upon, another sort of a roadblock, which was the idea of copyrights. And artisans were somehow reserved when it came to videographing their processes and videographing exactly how the craft comes about, because they believed that if it lands in the hands of someone else or a different market, it could actually be copied or it could be mass produced. And we were sort of very much adamant about educating the public that, documenting the craft does not mean that. Documenting the craft actually means that you are ensuing knowledge and education, and if it weren't for such documentation, the sustainability of crafts would not exist. And we started to launch different talks, and one of the talks was with Design Miami last year, and it was after the August 4th blast, where we took it upon ourselves to talk about reviving the cultural heritage or preserving the cultural heritage of Beirut. And one of the creatives that were on the panel was Nada. And we were so happy to have her and to start the conversation with her. And ever since then, I think it developed into a series of conversations, and it always went back to actual production. So we found ways to support the craftsmen in Lebanon that I think if it weren't for Nada trying to find different kinds of projects and collaborations to support them, they wouldn't have been able to support their families over the past year or 2 years. And so we supported in the ways that we knew how to, which is through craft collaborations and design collaborations. And I think Nada can talk more about how that developed.
Actually, I met Farah quite a few years ago. My family's in the textile business, and there's something called Première Vision in Paris, where they show textiles from all over the world. And there was a section for very specialty textiles. And do you remember when I walked in? Yeah. And there were only like 7 or 8 stands from India, China, Japan. And one of the stands was from Sharjah. And I thought it was very unusual to see someone from Sharjah. And then we started to talk. And then many years later is when she contacted me for the talk after the blast. And for me, the blast was something that triggered, I get very sensitive about the subject, but it triggered a strength in me that was extremely creative. I just had this creative surge. And for me, what kept us going were the craftsmen, because they would not stop working. Even with all the problems that were happening, they were still by my side, because we had projects abroad and the situation was terrible, but we still had to keep working for the people abroad. And when Farah contacted me to do this collaboration, we thought we have to find that really nice formula where we can work together. And for me, when someone's really interested in craft, it's one of my weakest points.
And so, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of your work kind of stems from craftsmanship and is heavily inspired by that. And so, obviously, when things like that happen in your environment, in your social circles, and privately, it would trigger your creative process. But what and how do you kind of mend that with, say, what you would call modern design? Like how and what's the process there, right? Because we're going to talk about how then we cross-pollinate.
Yeah. Well, for me, when you think craft, and really, it's sad that today the word craft is related to very maybe tourist objects or, not very contemporary design. And what I've been watching around the world is that there's this new term that they say contemporary craft. And craft has been elevated to a very contemporary level abroad. But in the Arab world, it hasn't been elevated so much. So when I grew up in Japan, and of course, Japan is a place where craft is completely elevated. You have master craftsmen everywhere. People work under them, apprentices. And for me, this was something very noble. And when I moved to Lebanon 20 years ago, you know, what I saw was backgammon games in tourist shops on the streets in Damascus or Lebanon. And that was where craft ended. Or antique pieces, Ottoman pieces from 200 years ago. And so I thought there must be a way where we can elevate craft. And that is by injecting a design element. And I use my Japanese aesthetics that I grew up around. And all I did was simplify that Middle Eastern craft. And suddenly a new, you know, it created a kind of revolution. I mean, it went beyond me. So that's how I started, yeah.
Obviously, Irthi focuses a great deal on that, right? It's kind of this revival of craftsmanship and of kind of forgotten skill sets or tradition in craft, in kind of design, right? So then comes this union between the two, Irthi and Nada. And so where did this begin? Like at what point? Because I know that there's a very particular, in this collaboration, Zenobia, which by the way is kind of all around the space. You'll see these beautiful vases around you. Where do you begin? Like where did you guys pick, okay, this is what's going to be Emirati about this, and this is what's going to be Lebanese about this? Like what was the process in cross-pollination of design, of craftsmanship?
Yeah. I think what Nada was mentioning, that design like brings together all these, I think, global issues in terms of craft, sustainability, preservation, heritage, together into maybe one. These are all very complex issues, but they're brought together in this collection, and I think in many of Nada's work as well, in a very simple and elegant manner. So in a way, so in a way, what happens is I think it brings together very complex issues and it simplifies them. And in this case, they're simplified into a system of interlocked strips. And those strips happen to be a combination of ones that are created from the UAE by Emirati artisans under the craft of Telli, and some that are created by Lebanese artisans under the craft of marquetry. And these have been brought together. And in this case, what design has done, it's modulated craft into the system. And I think a lot of design is maybe sometimes limited by our memory linkages. So if maybe someone's Emirati and they look at the vases or the bowls, they would resonate with the craft of Telli because they would remember their mothers or the grandmothers that used to wear it, and they're not used to seeing it on an object rather than on a garment. Versus someone who's not Emirati, they would probably relate to the objects in a very different way. And I think we always forget that we not only communicate like in and amongst ourselves, but we also communicate with objects. And that communication is sometimes, implicit, not explicit. And we're used to everything being explicit because of the technology and the digital revolution and all of that. But I think it's important to come back to that. And I think what we did in the beginning is we just we said, okay, we're going to exercise the craft of Telli with something, and deconstruct it and sort of recontextualize it into a product rather than into a garment, and what works from the Lebanese craft or know-how to complement it. And this is how it came about. And we started, to look into functionality and to look into all these aspects that actually came as a result of the techniques themselves. So I think the product changed so many times, or what it would be changed so many times, but we just knew that those know-hows or those processes need to exist within the collection.
I mean, the first designs we did was a tray, not a vase. And the idea was, so the marquetry strips that you see here, it's a contemporary version of the typical marquetry that's used on the backgammon games. Usually in the past, they used to use natural wood colors. So it was always browns, shades of brown. But to inject that modernity, we started to dye the woods. And so this marquetry strips are made with different colors of wood. And you have the reds and the greens. And Telli also, on the other hand, also used to be more traditional. It was more black and gold and silver. And here they're using also contemporary colors. So you see some vases that are, we call them the pop, modern pop kind of colors. And then you have the black and white. And so we thought it would be very interesting that we weave the two cultures together. So it's really the two craft cultures together.
And it's interesting, I know this, but the Lebanese craftsmanship part of this is actually male.
Yes, they're men.
And then the Emirati side of it is very much female. So that was a very interesting kind of intersection there. Now, obviously, when you collaborate like this and when you are so conscious of heritage, culture, and craftsmanship, you know, you immediately associate that with employment, sustainability, you know, the environment even, and preservation and all these kind of grand words. But then I'm sure it is met with a great deal of challenges, right? It's not easy to be able to, you know, we live in a heavily industrialized world, and I can't help but ask, what were the challenges in putting together this collection?
I think that design actually gives a voice to... It's not done. So I think that design gives a voice to whether it's the women artisans or the male artisans that would otherwise be invisible. And I think that they've done such a fearless and great job in actually believing in the craft. And now these designed objects are on different international platforms, and they were recently in Shanghai. And I think that it is, you know, a result of the way or their attitude towards the craft and towards what they do. And I think it's important to also note that those artisans have been practicing this craft for generations, and they've always been practicing it from their home while their husbands may be at sea. And it was their own means to generate their own income independent of their husbands. And that's the way that they would support their family. And I think that there are many challenges because, as you can see, it's very time consuming and it's also very complex. I'm talking about the telly mostly. It's very complex, and it really requires a lot of movement within the same second, I would say. We're also we're in the process actually within Irthi of diagramming those movements and diagramming the processes that each design requires. And it's actually very complex for us to also diagram it and translate it into something that the younger generation can learn. So I think there are a few different complexities or challenges that we face in terms of educating, in terms of knowledge transfer, and also keeping the younger generation sort of involved and also interested in this. And what we wanted to do with this collection specifically is to really democratize the craft and the handmade aspect of it, and showcase it in ways where everyone can relate to it and have it as part of their home and their life. So no matter what generation you're from, what cultural background you're from, you would end up relating to it, and hopefully over time we can analyze such interaction with the objects.
Nada, what kind of challenges did you face?
First of all, actually, you have to pick and choose the craftsmen, because not all of them are ready for doing something different from what they're used to doing. So it's about really actually talking to them, having a conversation with them to see even within the workshop which person would be the one that's working on this. So it's very much a very personal thing. So the challenges in our case is really like no one's ever sewn into wood like this. So this was a very difficult one. The other thing that we also have in the broader sense is that these craftsmen, most of them, their children don't want to do craft. You know, they're all taking computer classes, which is probably the most extreme opposite They want to do, computer science, etc., because they feel that this doesn't bring money. But then when they see objects, and even if they're not design savvy, they're very aware that the objects are turning out really beautiful. Like what they do is turning out to be, I mean, I don't want to say they're beautiful for myself, but in general, like, they're coming up to be finished pieces that are something that they have never expected. Even their children come around sometimes and they see that, maybe there is a potential in this. So it's actually making them closer to what's happening in the world, because they feel so disconnected really to the world. So in a way, when, like you said, when it's in Shanghai, or, when we first started making objects and they were, reaching ministers of, state, anything that comes with some form of cultural identity given as gifts, it's something that when you tell the craftsmen, they see their work in a different light.
Actually, just to kind of cue that, you said something earlier that stuck with me. You said anything that is handmade stands the test of time, right? Because you had come across something that was hundreds of years old, that hadn't aged at all. And I guess this is less pleasant, I guess, of a conversation, but anything that you can say that about, obviously, it's synonymous with quality, and quality comes at a price, right? And so you're looking at these beautiful things, you want to associate craftsmanship to something that is kind of accessible, it's something that is close to you, it reminds you of your mother, of, your brother, whatever it may be, and there's a hefty price tag all of a sudden on it. So how do you reconcile with that? Either of you can answer this.
I mean, I think that just for awareness, it starts by going by a hefty price. I mean, it is not a matter of just choosing to make expensive piece. It actually takes many, many hours. And when you get good craftsmen, they cost a lot. The good people, there's value in them. And I'd rather pay, actually, someone who has worked very hard with their hands than a machine making something, So I think that there is value to that, the attention to detail that goes into the pieces. I remember long ago, Philip Stark, I don't know if you know him, he came to a lecture, and his first chair was $900, and then over time, he was able to sell a chair for $9 in Target. But it's a matter of time. So today, I think, yes, we are making high-end luxury products, but it's reaching the right people who are then, in turn, valuing it, and then eventually it will reach the masses. So I think it starts like that. I mean, it's the normal process. So I don't feel so guilty.
No, you shouldn't. No, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't. People, you look at a product, and people don't kind of have that. People don't necessarily think of it in that kind of linear thought process, right? It's like, of course, there's so much time, there's so much craftsmanship, there's so many people that were involved in this. There's so much.
But there's something. Just sorry to interrupt, but we also have this thing that in the Middle East, we don't think we should value our product so high. And I feel like because I came from outside, and I see that the amount of work that's put here is the same amount of work that's put whether in Italy or France or anywhere in the world. And so I wanted to raise that standard and just give confidence to not only the craftsmen but to ourselves. Yeah. We all have a kind of assumption that things made in the Arab world is not expensive. So when someone tells me, Nada, you are so expensive, we love your work, I tell them, thank you so much. It's such a great compliment, because you have this assumption that it shouldn't be expensive. So why did that assumption come around? It's something that we need to work on from inside, the confidence. So this is where I get kind of happy when I get proposed, to do projects like this, where we're really trying to elevate craft from two different worlds.
And I think also as consumers, we need to sort of take up the responsibility to be curious enough to find out more about what we're buying into. especially that now populations are changing, environments are changing, and cultural habits are changing, and also social behaviors are changing. And so it's always easier, I think, when such initiatives are taken on a macro scale, like by the governments, and it's easier for it to trickle down or get everyone educated on the topic. Like, for example, when in relation to government systems, the way Bahrain looks into its own pearling traditions and sort of sustaining that within Bahrain, they have banned the import of cultured pearls, for instance, and that's how natural pearls still today, they can influence the economy. They are capable of influencing the economy of Bahrain. In the UAE, I think if we sort of approach it from that mindset that, you know, the local design and the local crafts are important for our economy, and they are important to be preserved. We can always tax higher the European-made products, like the same way like we've, you know, reduced smoking and made smoking more expensive. But I mean, there are so many different ways.
You've just compared smoking to high-end European brands. It's not a bad comparison, not entirely.
But what I'm trying to say, it's always easier, I think, to navigate the consumers at that level. And it's harder to do it maybe through raising awareness, talks like this, and, you know, whatnot. But I think in time it would change. And I think the new generation is more curious to finding out what they're buying into, rather than just, you know, brand names.
I mean, actually, it's really interesting that you would say that. Brand names, not that you're now a brand. So now I guess people buy more blindly. It's easier for you now to kind of align with that. But when you're Irthi and you're collaborating, say, with smaller designers or, you know, more emerging designers, are you having to have this conversation like a lot, having to explain?
I think luckily, because I think the idea of I don't know what you call it, but a locally crafted product is not new to the UAE, but I think it's now getting so much press and attention. People are paying more attention to it. So we are, I don't think we're working that hard in that sense. I think people are resonating with the products, because I think that if something is handmade, it somehow, you know, you do get attracted to it, or you do resonate with it at a certain level. But I think that it's still a very niche market, definitely. And it's not something that I think everyone has taken up into their intimate homes and into their lifestyles yet. It's still at a very much luxury level, hotel level, interior design level. But I think it's interesting to see how we can relate to the mothers, relate to the younger generation, and to see how those items could become gifting items. Yeah.
For me, what's really interesting about what you're talking about is really energy, and I'm very much into the spiritual aspect of craft. And I always give this example, like when you're cooking for someone you love, and the food is so good, and you can't explain it. And that's what people feel when they see or feel a craft object. And so, like in our case, we like to make design that not just looks good but feels good. And it's the soul. You feel the soul of the craftsman or the woman. You feel it. You can't explain it. And this is something that, you know, is priceless, I think. Like the food of, you know, your mother. So for me, that's a very important aspect to craft. And actually, I don't know if it's a good thing or not a good thing, but I always, to make it easier for people to understand, I always say, you know, I'm aiming to be Hermes of the Middle East. And Hermes is actually fourth generation craft people. And so I kind of observe the way they're working over time. And you see that every single thing that they do is really handcrafted, and it has this beautiful, elegant detailing. And it's reached the people, to really reach out to people, that it becomes almost a household name. that craft is not something unattainable, but it's something you can actually have in your home.
I mean, you know, it's interestingly enough because Hermès, yes, but they're a family-owned business. They're huge, and yes, at the core of their values is craftsmanship, right? And it translates pretty clearly into their prices. But what and how? Because now everything is heavily digitized, and so the way that that's communicated and disseminated to their clients, their consumers at large, is on the internet, right? And so sometimes, you know, when craftsmanship takes time and you need a great deal of resources to be able to get that to your consumers, to make a change actually. What are some of the biggest kind of challenges you've faced, especially Irthi, in communicating that to, say, potential consumers? Because you're not a brand in that sense, you're very much an institution trying to disseminate that information. So how and what are your kind of, or the alleys that you've chosen to kind of grow your audience?
I think that the most interesting design is collective design, and that's how we approach the way we create our bodies of work. So it's never us in a void. It's always the artisans with designers together with researchers and even sometimes scientists. So there are many players involved, and I think it's worked to our benefit in the way that we have integrated craft into design, where we formulated it in a way that it would be possible to, I wouldn't say mass produce, but to produce in the required quantities in order to make the project commercially viable. But what we are trying to aim for is that tradition and design come back together away from mass production. This is our aim. And that was always the case, and somehow tradition went away and everyone's into design, but that is how we're looking at it. And I think that right now it's interesting to see how, like, when you look at the pieces, how much is actually intricate in terms of proportion of the whole entire piece, and how much is maybe faster to create. And we do prepare ahead of time, obviously, but we also deal with a large body of artisans within the UAE. We're fortunate enough to actually have a database that is actually not only within Sharjah but also within the rural areas. So we've got hundreds and hundreds of artisans who are capable of doing many different crafts. And Telly is not the only craft that they're quite adapt with, but we also train them. So we train them on what to expect and how to manage the time. And I think it was quite difficult to navigate this collection just because we were over WhatsApp with them the whole time. They were practicing it from their home. They weren't coming into the center. And so we had to production manage and look at the quality through photos and videos, which wasn't super easy, and vice versa. I think you had to do that for us, and we had to do that for you. And but I think collective design is interesting, and there's a designer called Thomas Libertini, who's actually using not craftsmen or craftswomen to create his collections, but he's actually using bees. So he creates the scaffolding for a vase, and then 40,000, 30,000 bees come into play, and they create honeycomb structures, and then there goes a vase, and the flower actually lasts longer in honey rather than water or any other material. And so it's interesting to see from nature how different elements come together to create a collection. And I think it's always good for us to, in terms of the framework, the way we work towards the projects, to go back to that. Because as you said, populations are changing, environment is changing, and all of that. And yeah, it's been difficult, but I think we've managed.
We always say slow is the new fast. So when things take time, it's even better.
I think that was always true. We just only have come to realize that. I have a question before I open questions to our audience. Obviously, the fruit of this entire collaboration is cross-cultural or like a cross-pollination of cultures. What do you find were the benefits of that, both for Lebanon, I guess, and for the Emirates? And to the craftsmen that were involved, actually, like what is the actual benefit of being able to cross-pollinate cultures like that in design?
Well, I think it's always great when expertise from each different craft or each different region is brought together to create something. And I think the result is quite strong in that sense. And it's also interesting that it's the first time that is done. I know the first time is overused in this region, but it really is. And it was nice for us to actually start from a plain slate and to work off of that and see where that would lead. We didn't really have a predefined notion of what it should look like or operate like, but we knew maybe the price range that we wanted it to fit into. We knew the type of interior design spaces they would fit into. But at the end of the day, our sole aim is to empower as many artisans as we could. And because this project was quite large and required a lot of workmanship, we managed to support over, I believe, 50 artisans from the UAE on this, and I think around maybe 10 artisans from Lebanon. And obviously, that sustainability of jobs is always great. And the ongoing production is always great because that's how they get to support themselves, and that's how the economy will grow. And I think it was beneficial and also hopeful to the Lebanese artisans, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I would say exactly the same thing. You know, the benefit is really for the artisans and also for people to see that. And for me, it was a big challenge also to know what to do with this telly, because we're used to it on fabrics, like on clothing. So really to think out of the box a little bit, and that is kind of encouraging because there's always something new that can come out of collaborations.
Were the artisans really briefed on what it is how their work was going to be complemented on the other side? Were they
in my case they worked on it together. So they saw so we received these rolls of fabric of telly. So our people knew what they were doing, but I'm not sure about your.
We've learned to integrate our artisans early on in the process and to show them actually the drawings and the proposals that we get or that we propose, because when we don't, they're like, okay, we're not going to work. Like, why are you giving us this much work? If we don't know what it's going to look like or where it's going to turn out, they want to know what they're getting themselves into. And they go like, okay, so you're breaking our heads over something. You need to tell us why, and why those deadlines, and why can't you extend the deadlines, etc. So it's always a conversation because we don't have a choice as well. But I don't think anyone really knew how it's going to turn out until the sample pieces were there in the office, and then obviously we've shared with them the photos, and we shared with we would take it to our center whenever we can to show them, and they're very proud. They're very proud of the work that happened.
But it's true that today you can't just tell them do this. You have to explain why and where, and I think that engages them. And now I've reached a point where some of the craftsmen give me ideas of new craft techniques. So this is really nice. When I start seeing them coming to me with new samples, they're like, what do you think if we do this? And this is like something that is really, I'm so grateful for, because I feel that all these years I've been like pushing them to, try the craft on different materials, etc. And this time, these days, they're coming to me and they're saying, we have some ideas. So they finally got it, how to think in a contemporary way.
And these are the same people you've been working with for years, or is it, do you keep looking at new people?
I keep searching for new people, but it's very hard to meet people who can think out of the box a little bit. So, but the more we do, the more they're challenged, and the more they're like, okay, there's potential. We don't have to stick to the same things we're doing all these years.
Hermès is the goal.
Hermès is the goal. Beyond, we'll try to go beyond that.
All right, I'm gonna open up the questions to the audience. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. And
before we move,
testing. That's a good time to do that.
Hi. Before we move forward, please note that we are recording the session for our podcast. So if you're comfortable with that, we can move forward.
There's a question over there.
Mm-hmm.
My question is kind of like a two-part question. How much of a kick do you get out of developing a new method to use some of the crafts and or new materials that you can find? And do you think you want to turn it into a habit, you know, mixing all of these different cultures and different crafts from all of these different countries?
For me, I get a big kick out of that. Seriously, my favorite room in my studio is the sample room with different craft techniques. I don't even care what it turns out to be at the end. I really love the samples and the, what we can do with these techniques. And the second question was,
Yeah, how much do you want to turn it into a habit where you find different cultures and different crafts, maybe from Africa, maybe from...
Yeah, for me, I think, I like the idea of going to different cultures and doing what I've done to Middle Eastern craft, but applying it in different crafts. So Cyril Zamit introduced me to carpet making in Afghanistan, and we had done some carpets in Afghanistan. I'm doing something in Pakistan. So hopefully, we go down the Silk Route or anywhere. Maybe I'll do something with Hermès. I don't know.
Thank you. Two questions in one. You mentioned, for example, there's a lot of work. Just for the audience, can you say more or less how many hours the piece you have in front of you is about? More or less.
You tell me. So, what? How many hours?
Yeah, more or less. Just to explain that.
So if you look at the wood this is a solid wood. So to make it in a curve, they have to cut it in little strips. I think you might have seen them. So that takes, I don't know, Cynthia, right there. Maybe you can tell me how many hours.
Cynthia, tell us.
Each strip by itself takes around 2 weeks.
These are the strips of marquetry.
So first of all, there's a step of taking veneers, staining them, stacking them for them to dry, and then shaving them. And for these shavings to become solid, that's only 2 weeks of just the strips. I don't know how many hours the tally takes as well. And then the assembly of these solid wood vases also is another process in itself, which takes about also another 3 weeks.
And then we have to
the weaving.
Weave
it's
into
a very
them.
long process. I don't have the exact hours, but approximately at least.
That's a good question. We'll work it out.
So it's more or less the 6 months for an Hermès bag, by the way.
Yeah,
So,
Okay, so
no,
same.
And the other question is more to Farah. Recently Abu Dhabi was named Creative City of UNESCO for music. Dubai is Creative City for design. Sharjah is Creative City for craft. So what is the next step of Sharjah and your organization specifically to kind of make craft going into the level you were starting now, as you were, Nada was saying using the word elevate, but okay, there's a lot of documentation you've been doing so far. What is the next plan for Sharjah to really make sure that craft is embodied into a normal situation and conversation in the country?
So as you mentioned, Sharjah has been designated as a craft city for the craft of Telly specifically, which is the craft we have here today. And actually a meter of Telly can take from anywhere from 20 hours up to 200 hours, depending on the design. We've generated over 60 designs over the past years with the artisans ranging from cotton thread and khosa to leather, rope, pearl, you name it. And now we're looking into ways where we can, as you said, document the crafts, but also look into different ways where we're working on the palm front. And to see how we could create palm textile from the khosa. So generally or traditionally within the UAE, they've been creating safifa weaves through the palm front, and now we're looking into different ways where we can integrate technology, also different materials within that to create a textile that could be utilized for maybe more uses, whether it's architecture, interior, fashion, or whatnot. And we've been working with different labs in Europe to produce that, and we're looking forward to developing that further. We've patented the craft of the date palm textile, and we're looking forward to investigating that. And we were just talking about the dyeing publication that we've also just created, where we're looking into different ways of naturally dyeing the khos or the palm textile, because there are certain colorways that have always been dyed through acidic dyeing techniques, usually imported from India in the UAE, and we're recreating those colors and various other colorways with the alchemy of dyeing in order to create that kind of palette. And you know, we're just going to keep on, I think, innovating in crafts and linking it up to different industries. I think that's the key. And I was just telling Nada that I'm actually happy but sad that this collaboration ended, and she pointed out that no, we should collaborate on the dyeing next. So I think there's something there.
Yeah, for me, whenever it's the experimentation that inspires me. So hopefully we'll do something with that.
I have a question. Thank you for this. It's absolutely gorgeous and fascinating. And part of what I really enjoyed was how you have such a discerning look at artisanal work, handcraft, and design, and how that matches with how you scale something to be commercially viable. So I'm curious, do you consider this then a limited edition collection? Will it continue to be produced? Where does it go from here once this beauty is in the world?
For Irthi, this is the first non-limited edition collection. So we're actually planning to produce this in large numbers. And we've priced it in a way where we think that it could be commercially viable and a democratic piece that could sit into gallery spaces or even retail stores. So yeah, I don't know if you...
I know limited edition is a very cool term, but I'm kind of against it because I feel that you have to reach the masses. Why should we limit it? And so, especially for work made by craftsmen. So I'm really happy that it's not limited.
Nada, one point that you mentioned about the conversations you have with the craftspeople was incredibly fascinating. I think anytime you're trying to convince someone of your vision, of your idea, is already hard. But when you're battling history, heritage, all of those things, I think it's even more difficult. So what were those conversations like? What kind of resistance do you face, and how do you overcome that?
When you just actually sit with them on an equal level, you drink their tea and the extra sweet tea, and you actually, listen to them and listen to their stories, talking about their father and their, family and how they. So you just put them at ease. That's the first thing that I usually do, is I really give personal attention to them. Because I'm actually curious about, why would anyone spend so many hours on doing this? I mean, today in this fast world, we just want to get things done. And they actually enjoy the pace. And for me, most of the craftsmen are very peaceful people because they take a lot of time doing things. So for them, they calm me down. So I'm the one who actually benefits more than they do. And when they see that you're actually so interested in what they're doing, and then you start slowly introducing another way of doing it, they actually don't mind because they know that you're with them on it. So it's very, very, it's a very smooth process. But there are people who are very resistant, and those are people who are just scared of doing something, you know. So also if I come with that, knowing that approach that they're scared of actually change, and, you know, you show an example and you keep telling them, I know it can be done, because a lot of times they resist, and then they see the result, then they're okay. It's small steps, really.
Final question.
All right. Well, I guess that brings us to a close. Thank you both so much for this wonderful conversation. I've learned so much tonight. I hope you all did as well. Thank you for coming and being here with us. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you.